Hello, in this podcast we're looking at different ways populations grow, and with this podcast and the next podcast, expected to categorize forces affecting populations as either biotic potential or environmental resistance, and also you should be able to calculate population change. How do we know how much a population is growing or shrinking? Well, there's a formula for that, and that is that the population change equals the number of births minus the number of deaths plus number of immigrants, it could be number of people also, or the number of organisms that come in plus minus the number that leave. Another term that you see sometimes is fecundity, and fecundity is another name for births. So here we have a problem that involves the formula. On an island off the coast of Costa Rica, 800 black-throated trogons live. Population biologists determined that this bird population was nearly isolated, with only one immigrant and no emigration of trogons. After 1 year, scientists were able to count 80 births and 10 deaths. The net growth for this population is, say that the rate equals birth minus death plus the immigrants minus the immigrants. So, birth rate is 80 minus 10 plus 1 minus 0. So this together is 80 minus 10 is 70 plus 1. So the whole net growth rate is 71. And that's how you do that. Relatively simple formula compared to what we did in the past with dimensional analysis. Now, exponential growth is growth without limit. And let's say, here's an example of it. Let's say your backyard has one daisy in it. And let's assume that every daisy produces 5 seeds and every seed sprouts in your backyard. Calculate the population size of daisies for the first 6 generations. The way this is done is, say here we have generation 1, and you see generation 1 has 1 daisy, and that's 5 to the 0, which is 1. Generation 2 is 5 because that 1 daisy has 5 seeds, and all the young survive. So that's 5 to the 1. Generation 3 has 25. That's 5 to the second power. And you see how each one of these, it just increases by powers. That's why it's called exponential growth. And here we can see what the graph looks like for exponential growth. And that, you see, it starts off growing very, very slowly and then very, very rapidly. And that's sort of what the human population growth has looked like up until recently. We'll see this more in the next chapter. That for a long time, the population of humans went very, very slowly. We reached our first billion in the 19th century, and then it's increased rapidly, and it's starting to slow down now, and we'll see why in the next chapter. Now here we're going to get into some definitions. That exponential growth curve is called a J curve because it looks like the letter J. And biotic potential is one of the forces, and that is the capacity for growth under ideal conditions. So these are the things which would increase the growth rate of them. So elephants have a low biotic potential because their natural rate of increase is very, very low, while cockroaches have a very high biotic potential. And you can see this in intrinsic rate of increase is one of these forces in biotic potential. And intrinsic rate of increase is the rate of population growth with unlimited resources. And an elephant, we see that it produces 1 calf every 4 years. And one cockroach can lay 300 to 400 eggs. And that will give us profoundly more cockroaches much more quickly than what we saw in our growth of daisies where each daisy only had 5. The next term is environmental resistance, which is the opposite, environmental resistance, which is the opposing force, and that's the combination of factors that limit the growth of population. And that could be something like territoriality, could be competition, could be predation. And then carrying capacity, which is also seen as the letter K, is the maximum population that a habitat can sustain indefinitely without being degraded. Now, this exponential growth is not sustainable because the population will quickly exceed the ability of the ecosystem to support it. It quickly goes past the carrying capacity, and then it will degrade. It will run out of food or water. And not all the organisms will then survive. They can be eaten, they can die from disease, they can starve from lack of food or water or other resource. And other resources could be light or soil for a plant. And there was a lab that you might have done when you took living environment or biology, where you looked at deer. We may do this. Maybe if we have time, we may do that lab here. And there we saw that in that lab we're looking at deer near the Grand Canyon in the Kaibab Plateau, and actually we'll see that in the next one over here. And on Kaibab Plateau, what happened was something like this. The population, when zooming up, and the reason why when zooming up was because of things that the ranchers did that made the populations of deer go up, because they had cattle out on the range, and so the predators of the cattle were the same as the predators of the deer. So they killed a lot of the predators, and at the same time they also stopped hunting of the deer. So those two things cut down environmental resistance, and that made the population of deer go way up above the carrying capacity for the deer. So that population boomed. And then after it boomed, eventually it degraded the habitat, they ran out of food, and then the population crashed. And when that crashed, actually it didn't go to zero, but it went down very, very low. The carrying capacity actually decreased because the habitat became so degraded. And these booms and crashes more frequently occur when populations are introduced to a new habitat, because they don't have a lot of these environmental resistance forces, and so they go zooming up, and then more typically you will get a logistic curve. And logistic curve is also called the S curve, and it starts off very slowly. It starts off looking just like an exponential curve, like an S curve. But then what happens is it slows down, and then it goes up to carrying capacity, and it stays at carrying capacity, and it stabilizes there. That's one possibility. There's another possibility that could happen too. And let's just erase this stuff here. And just to show it, I'm going to have it reach carrying capacity a little bit sooner. So you have this slow curve, it goes up, and it may fluctuate, going up and down, little booms and crashes. It's still stable being there, and it could be fluctuating due to predation, where a cycle between predators and prey. Whereas predators go up, the amount of prey go down, and that causes the predators to go down. And then with fewer predators, then the prey population can increase. So it fluctuates up and down around the carrying capacity. Now we come to our concluding questions. Number 1, what is the formula for calculating birth rate? Number 2, why is exponential growth unsustainable? Number 3, which kind of growth is a J curve? Which kind of growth is an S curve? Number 4, define biotic potential. Number 5, define environmental resistance. That concludes this podcast, and the next podcast will be part 2 of this topic. I'll see you in class tomorrow.